keep saying they're my favorite. But there's an expression, E plus R equals O. So event plus response equals outcome. If we look at that formula and we draw a box around the letter R, the response is the only thing in this equation that we control. Quite frankly, it's one of the very few things in this entire world that you get to control. So I'm trying to intentionally put thoughts behind how do we want to respond. And the formula we use to help define that response is, do we think it's above the line or below the line? When I meet stress, when I meet difficulty, do I snap? When I meet stress, do I meet difficulty? Can I breathe through it, smile, and tackle a challenge, perhaps with a positive attitude? Right? We get to choose that. Now, overall, we've got a bunch of identities. This format is more oriented towards a student, but you guys can see from a team standpoint, there's a variety of options. I think the personal and the professional are pretty easy. There might be one as a spouse. There might be one as a, since we're all older, as a child. How do we want to respond to our parents when they cause different things? And so what we would like to do, and I'll show on the next slide with the example, is kind of draw out what is an actual behavior that is above the line versus what is an actual behavior below the line. And folks, this thing, it looks simple to fill out. I'll tell you the challenge we do here to make it a little bit harder is your mission statement, ideally, should be 12 words or less. Unemotional on your vision, other than it has to be precise goals. And then your core principles, ideally, you're able to shrink down to one word and then have 12 word or less type description of what that principle means to you. And to paint a picture for it, if I were to walk inside of your nonprofit company headquarters, find this laying on the street somewhere, I can pick it up, and with very little interpretation or outside oversight needed, understand very much what your team what your team defines to them. If I were to come around and not talk to the CEO who's probably pitched this mission, but talk to the lowest member of your company, your nonprofit, go, hey, what is an example of below the line behavior for you? And then they can say it and they can give that descriptor. So it forces you to get really clear, right? I can throw the word integrity around. We all know integrity means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But frankly, in my view, I don't even like having integrity on there because I've been those more in the permission to play values, right? I don't want to interact with you if core values such as integrity, excellence, etc., are being reinforced. I want a core principle there that's almost arguable, and then you can explain to me why this is so fundamental to the organization you live in. Kind of same with the behaviors. So that's the team aspect in there. We'll pause for questions, let you guys kind of fire at me on what makes sense. And I'd ask you, I'm sure at this point you're kind of like, okay, we've seen a version of this before. I'd ask you to think, if we've seen this before, why am I standing up here talking to you guys again? Where are the shortfalls and how you've experienced this previously?
Could you please redefine the E, the R, and the O? I was taking notes and I got a little caught up in my transcribing and trying to keep up with what you were saying.
All good. So the formula, event plus response equals outcome. So event occurs to us, and then we get to choose that response, which directly influences the outcome. My main point in there is that the response is the one thing we control, right? The acronym APE, attitude, preparation, and effort. Ideally, there's some level of response that's above the line that falls in those bins, but we all know we've been there. We've been short, unintentional, rash in our actions. So the intent is to be deliberate about what the culture of our team looks like intentionally to respond above the line and be the way we want to be. You guys can draw the rest of us out from there, right? We create this guiding document, and then what do we do to reinforce it? What is the behaviors? How do we discipline? How do we reward? All those things kind of hinge off of this cornerstone.
Thank you.
You bet. What else we got for questions? Okay, so help me out. You guys have all probably done a similar exercise to this. Where have you seen it go well, and where have you seen it fail?
Well, I think for one, I've seen that there's not been like a visitation on it again. So it winds up being kind of something that kind of just dissipates over time.
Okay, good. Who else?
I guess
How many of you?
it,
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I
No,
guess
go
in
ahead.
line with what I believe Maya said, like sometimes I don't know if it's like mission creep or I just think that there's sometimes an evolution, right? So from a still place, you set forth this mission, this vision, you set forth these goals. But as you work through them, I think sometimes there can be some tweaking that may um pull you away from or cause you to modify it. And to Maya's point, I think it's important to constantly revisit it and, maybe even tweak it as necessary, like have the space for it to evolve, not change, but have some space for it to evolve because you may get into it and realize, we thought that was going to work, but maybe it's not going to work. Does that seem relevant? Does that seem relevant
Yes,
for everyone
perfect.
else? Yes.
Okay, one more. Reasons why this has not worked.
I have a quick question. Did you say the core principle should be a one-word adjective, just one word?
Yeah, when we go when we go to the next slide, I'll give you some examples. It doesn't have to be. My point in the one word or the 12 words or less mission statement is that when we are forced to distill our writing down as tight as we can, we quickly realize what is important, what is fluff, and what is truly saying what we want it to. Right? There's an old quote by Mark Twain. I would have written you a short letter, but I didn't have the time. Right? We forget that we're so verbose in our writings and our communication. The power of brevity, conciseness, and relevance is that important. So all I was trying to get across with the core principles is that we want, if I find it randomly on the street, I want to be able to understand what your nonprofit is about and the how. What is your principle over preference that you stand for? And can we get it down to that one or two words and then a tight description so that there is no question what excellence means to this organization, or mine is effort, my definition of effort, what it means to me as examples. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Excellent points brought up. The point here is not just to teach you guys how to fill out this worksheet. The intent here is just to draw out a bigger intentional culture development. For me, the speak it and it disappears could not be more common across the military. New commander comes in, he stands up, he gives his big speech, and then everyone goes back to what they're doing. So you have to think about ways that you intentionally, at least for me, visually and in my speech, use this team MVP, forgive the reference, but essentially as your Bible. Like when I walk in your building, are your core principles displayed? Do you believe in it enough that you're proudly able to roll it off? Just like if I were to ask you your birthday, can you repeat it? Are you able to hold people accountable to the standard that you're setting in your principles, or your above the line and below the line responses? If it's not worth paper it's written on, if it's only existing one time, but I never reference it again, it's never displayed anymore, or quite frankly, it's not argued with. It's not argued with at all, that we might have gone too soft on it. Perhaps you have 100% buy-in. Please let me know. You might be the first organization to achieve that. But my point is, it can't be just one word saying it, one speech by the CEO or someone. I'll give you two metrics of success. One I generally see is that the CEO becomes the CRO, so the Chief Reminding Officer. And then number two, when you start seeing mid-level leaders or even low-level leaders in your organization repeating the words back when they come in, right? What's the welcome letter when a new hire is there? Do you reference your core principles, your mission, your team MVP? How long does it take for that person who's joined the company to start taking ownership and pitching back what are the fundamentals of your company? So that's why the revisit question I'll bring up. 100% agree with you on the refresh. The world changes, the business changes. What's your battle rhythm? What's your periodicity for what you want to update this? Right? Ideally, it's quarterly. Everyone probably just freaked out because that's a lot of work. I will tell you, I was in one of the most classified units in the military, and we would do an offsite every quarter, and it would be the first one was a couple days, the second one would be one day, And if we spent 2 hours talking about our mission, and now we wanted to operationally do things, the remaining 8 hours were these arguments on culture. What is the struggle we have within the organization? Why is our team MVP not addressing it? Is it us? Are the words wrong? Do we have it wrong? And then how do we go about it to fix it? Do we have to change our behavior? Do we have to change how it's written? Do we have to change our principles? And so I don't think every organization has to be that drastic, but I'm trying to have some hyperbole on the value of culture definition and how much it's important to revisit and refresh it. But it comes down to the leaders, right? I don't care if you're the CEO, if you're a leader in there who's seeing your culture isn't doing what you wanted it to do, I think you have a responsibility to say, hey, right now this is a piece of paper that's not being followed, or hey, we got about 40% of buy-in. I often get asked a lot of times, how do I reinforce the culture that we believe in? And I believe it's a 3-step process. Number one, you have to believe it. You have to take some time, set aside, and truly decide you believe in this is the direction you want to move. Right? I don't really care if other people believe what you're saying initially. I care that when they listen to you talk about it, they believe you believe it. Your team believes that you believe it. Like that is a different level of buy-in to the culture of what you want to push your team. Number two is you got to sell it, right? This makes, you went off, you did your darkness retreat, you know what you want to do, you're fully believed in it, but everyone else is like, what is this person talking about? You have a bit of a salesmanship phase where you got to come back and be able to articulate this so crisply and get people to see the value on it, that they start to want to get on board with the direction or move it. And then lastly, and probably the hardest stage, is demanding the culture back from them. Believe, sell, demand. I can't give you a timeline for each of those phases, but I do know they're generally in that structured order. But a lot of people struggle with the demand phase, right? I said we're all about this, and then you tolerate certain behaviors that go counter against that. You have to take this step where you demand it back from them. Then lastly, no one really brought it up, but I'm curious, the amount of involvement from the team when deciding what you want your team culture to be, right? Is it C-suite or just the leadership chain? You know, top 3 maybe go off and do their darkness retreat and talk about this. Is there a little bit of a soft opening where you kind of pitch it and let people provide feedback? Maybe bring in the newest employee, ask them what this means to them and how they see it. There's a different level per company. I can't give you an answer because it's art, it's not a science. But what level of involvement do you want out of the folks in your company to help set that culture in that direction? Smaller companies, maybe 100%. Larger companies, maybe different segments of what you're doing. But there's pros and cons. It's obviously going to take a lot longer if you have a large majority of folks involved. Going to be a lot more painful because everyone's got an opinion. You're going to have to sort through all those things. But think of the diversity of opinion and what that can bring to you. Blind spots that you're potentially missing because you're only taking higher end folks in the company's perspective. Think of the buy-in, right? If I bring in folks who just, I'm just here to do my day job, but then you give them some skin in the game to contribute to the direction we're going. There's some opportunities there to have some radical buy-in from folks who maybe didn't think they was as valued. Okay, I'll pause on that. Questions after that piece.
Taylor, you had a question?
Yes, I was waiting to be recognized.
Sorry.
So did you say change it quarterly?
I'm not saying change it. I'm saying at least review it quarterly. I think there's value, but again, art and science, you've got to decide your busyness level and what you can handle. But you may look at it and be like, nope, we're good. Maybe 6 months because your environment doesn't change that often. The big picture message is yes, I think you should establish hard milestones on the calendar, thou shalt not touch, of when we're going to see and do a culture update. And for me, because I think culture is so important, I think the updated frequency of quarterly is okay. Now, weekly, obviously, culture's barely got time to set in before we're reviewing it. My point is find that right rhythm of how long it takes your culture to set in and how much review you think is appropriate.
I think some of this sounds like for corporate, like for profit, as opposed to like nonprofit. And I only say that because, like, I don't know, maybe I'm off, but like we have an annual retreat. And the retreat is the first day is with the staff. And then the second day, it's staff and any clients that we serve or participants in our organization. And it's once a year. And just to see what's working, to see what's not working. And we hear from everybody. We operate on a level that everybody gives input. We're not very big, but I can't imagine ever changing the idea that everybody has something to give, and that it's not a top down or bottom up, but it's level. And I honestly can't imagine like doing this every 6 months or every like 4 months, because we need time to see. So I'm just trying to figure out like what would be gained if we implemented it more. Also, there's the cost of like not working that day or 2 days and going away. I guess I'm just trying to figure out how to implement that. I'm not sure that I'm really grasping.
Yeah, so I'll address the first topic. I would definitely push back that this is a corporate thing. I am not a corporation. You'll see the example on the next slide. A bunch of cadets in an ROTC unit are not a corporation. This is about team building, team culture development, which I would argue exists in any sort of entity where there's more than one human interaction. What those humans decide to do is going to set a culture, and it's either going to be intentional or it's going to be accidental, and it forms as it forms. So the intent here is to be deliberate on our culture foundation in whatever project is involving pretty much more than one human. Frequency is totally up to you, right? I don't know the ins and outs of your world and how much things do change. I have found here that we do this about twice a year, and it's the right frequency. At a previous unit, the world did change so fast that it took more updates to have it be appropriate. You kind of made a line that the time you lose working to put this together, I would flip that a bit, and you almost have to slow down and go faster, right? If I have my culture aligned and everyone knows the direction they're supposed to be rowing, I think you're going to end up getting there faster than if we skip, MVP review day, culture establishment day, and the rollout of these things, because you will have alignment. You will know you have the right people on the team and continue to go. Now, you may come back and say, I've had the same team for 20 years, tight group of people. So yeah, that may be absolutely appropriate that you don't need it as often. My only counter would be people change, are we meeting them where they're at now versus where they were? Have I learned something new? Have they learned something new? And again, you may not have to change it, but at least we're being intentional in the review to make sure our culture is where we want it to be and not where it just happened to fall.
How does that fit in with, we have every 2 weeks, I meet with individuals. So every 2 weeks we talk, we look at what's working. And then actually once a month, we have like a team meeting. And we go over that. Is that the same thing that you're saying? Like we look at what's working. I mean, we check in all the time. I'm just curious about, is it more effective to have this? Obviously, I think it's more effective to have an intentional strategic planning retreat. But do you consider those biweekly check-ins and those monthly check-ins with the whole group the same sort of process, if you will?
It can be, depends, I don't know the agenda that you're talking. I think everyone generally latches on the goal phase of this one. So I would assume in your 2-week or monthly meeting, you're kind of going over the goals that the organization has, whether it be quarterly or monthly. What I'm suggesting is, in addition to that, you look at the behaviors and the core principles. Are we doing this the way we said we want to do it? Are we choosing that principle over preference? And are we seeing examples of behavior that are above the line or below the line? So maybe a bit of an addition. Maybe the best example I can give you is in the military, we do this thing called status of discipline, right? So we'll go around, we'll look at different work centers, different individuals. Some are high performers, and where do we want them to go in their career-wise? Some are lower. What do we have to do to rehabilitate them and give them the best opportunity for success? Are they in line with our culture? What do we have to do to get them there if they're not? And if they are, how do we get them to bring more people along, right? 10-80-10. 10% are high performers, you'll never have to do anything. They're absolutely crushing it. The vast majority of folks fall in the 80% realm, where they do a good job. They're performing every day, but maybe they're not bringing folks up to a higher level. And then you have your bottom 10, which don't really care and you'll never get. The goal for those top 10 percenters is to bring as many of those 80s up to their level as they can. And so there may be more intentionality you can put behind the culture / development, whatever. And maybe you're doing it already, but is it outlined, written down, and everyone understands kind of where the team is rowing so that it's in one direction? Does that help?
It does. I smiled a little bit because when you talked about the 10-8-10, the 10-80-10, and what the top 10 should be doing, it made me think of Booker T. Washington's Talented 10th.
Yeah, similar concept. Cool, that's good. Okay, any other feedback or questions on this one?
There is another question in the room. Ms. Bravo, you can go ahead and speak up.
Yeah,
Okay.
so the question is, you believe that the bottom 10 aren't going with you? I believe they don't want to go with me. I believe they are happy and content where they are. If that, perhaps it's a bit more toxic in where they are in their bottom 10. Somebody dropped in there the bell curve. I generally believe that there are bottom 10% that do not want to be saved. They don't have bigger ambitions. They're not going to improve. That fixed mindset has permeated their skull. So I'm trying to help bend you guys, and don't hold me to numbers if you got 3 people in your organizations. There's just a general scale here of those we want to invest in, and those that sometimes we got to recognize they're not going to move to the 80%. That'll help, Chris.
Can I ask a question now or make a statement?
Sure.
Okay, my name is Erla, and I am coming from Harrison's Place. And I just want to make sure I'm understanding you correctly, because I feel guilty about something that you said. And I know my staff has said something to me about it, deviating from rules, policies, regulations that I have set up. They would come to me and say, but this is who we are, this is what we stand for, yet you've done X, Y, and Z. And I always say to them, we have to exercise flexibility because of who we're working with and the fact that we're a small nonprofit. And I ask the staff that they take some of these problems on an individual basis, and that sometimes deviate from the rules and the policies and the regulations. Because the population we serve are the mentally ill, are the homeless, and they all have different stories and they all understand at a different level. So I think that it leads to some amount of uncertainty at times. Am I understanding the message you're giving us correctly?
You are. What I hear out of that is there's almost a culture, a principle element out of you guys that is do the maximum good, bend the rules when appropriate. You're describing that there's a time where you're going to deviate. This isn't a policy thing. I'm not asking you to turn this, put it on a memo head, and make sure everyone reads the TPS report. This is a culture thing about how we connect with our people. And so the message you've just given me is that the environment may radically change. We're going to deviate for a purpose. There are rules. There are rules that are set in stone. There's law, and then there's policy and guidance. And the fact that you laid out how intentional you were, you didn't just deviate for the sake of deviating. You had a policy, you had a known thing, and then you chose to deviate that on purpose. Like, to me, that almost starts to identify the culture you're in, while the rest of your team is coming to you and struggling with that. It sounds like they almost think, no, policy or nothing. So if there's a change, we're going to go at the boss. Now I can flip that. The danger of having do the right thing, bend it if needed, is what do you open up your culture to now? Hey, you've got a principle on here that says review and bend the thing in question if needed. So this is where the preciseness, the repetition, going through case studies of, hey, we chose to bend our policy and here's why, is so valuable, because you baselined it in your team MVP. You've been the chief repetitive officer who's talked about it. You provided an above the line vignette of where we did unintentional. And now hopefully the team starts to grasp. You've got someone on there who's like, I think this might be a case that's worth an exception. It might be worth pursuing the waiver addendum to our standard policy. And maybe they're a little more open to bringing it to you, where you make that decision and they know where you're coming from now because we've re-baselined our culture. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that was very helpful.
Great. I love all these questions. And I love bending policy whenever we can to do what's right. So good example. Okay. A long question. Give me a second to read this guy. Yeah. Great question, Taylor. I appreciate the precision of your question. I think you have outmaneuvered me in a generality that is 10-80-10. I am not saying to discard someone who is the bottom 10 who has a job for a job. Don't write them off. Don't try and get them fired. If they're doing what you need them to do, they might be more in that 80 than you think in that 10. What I'm trying to say, there's a level of investment, and you have to make a choice if you want to keep someone who is, let's use toxic as an example, that's going to detract from your overall mission. Now, there may be reasons to do that. That's fine. Again, we're being intentional. But someone who's showing up and doing their job every day, I tend to put more in that 80 category than I do the bottom 10. Does that help?
I guess I'm really challenging myself here more than anything because I've had to fire people and it was painful, right? And when my board talked to me, it was my intentionality of what Who Speaks for Me is and the reality of what people are capable of doing don't mesh up. For example, people who come from marginalized identities, right? Which all of us in the EVC program are people of color, right? But within the work we do, people are marginalized within their marginalized identities because we work with people who have been impacted by the criminal legal system, who are queer, and so on and so forth. Often what I find, because in my own history of employment, when you raise those issues in a predominantly, in the predominant culture, which would be straight, white, whatever, often you get dinged for it. So I've been overlooking people's like lack of references, lack of longevity on the job, and it's come back to bite me in the butt badly. So that means that I had to step back for myself. Nobody could really help me do that. I had to step back and be like, what is my mission? What is my vision? What are my core principles? And what do I want from people who are coming along on this journey with me? So I think and so within our culture now, the way the interviews go and things like that, I guess I'm having a hard time, but I guess for me, it's like, the last person I had to fire was my executive assistant. She like couldn't do simple things like get me into the Zoom, right? She could schedule the Zoom, but she wasn't scheduling it so that if she wasn't on the meeting, I could get in. And this happened literally like 12 times in a row. And it's terribly embarrassing, right? And we had lots of talks. Other team members talked to her. And then I just had to fire her because she really was just doing a job. She wasn't there because she believed in creating alternatives to incarceration for people impacted by the criminal legal system who have trauma. That wasn't what she was there for, right?
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like you did the firing. You felt guilty on it. There's layers mixed in here when it comes to identity and marginalization. I think there's something there principle-wise that perhaps you erred one way or the other, or you got to err another way, right? Overlooking things. Maybe the term is now we look into it a bit more because we want our nonprofit to be able to make sure those identities and marginalizations don't occur and we can hire them. But the point is that reflection on it. This is not, I love that you said that the intentionalness gives you a little bit more comfort in yourself that they weren't there for the mission of that company. So you're okay with it a bit. Like that is the bigger picture point of this, is that here's the mission. here's what I've sold you, and now I'm demanding it back from you. I'm also demanding the principles on how we do things. If you can't get there, are you truly the right fit for this? And it's not just the Zoom, but culturally, why aren't you the right fit? Do you care enough to learn how to open up the Zoom for your CEO? If the answer is no, I realize it's a really hard decision to remove someone, and there's a billion second and third order effects that you're going to take personally because you're a leader, and leaders take things personally because we give a shit. So it doesn't make it easier, but at least it gives you something to index it up against, and give you a little bit of a guiding stone.
Thank you.
I want to jump into this conversation. Just sorry about my audio earlier. How's it now? Can everyone hear me?
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah.
I've had to face similar decisions in the past 2 years, and on lack of performance, and then inability for me to understand when that performance would actually happen. Right, like I got no guarantees on the future evolution of that individual. And this was a high performer at one point, but suffered from some health issues. Right. So to your situation, Taylor, on what's happening now versus what we can predict in the future, and all the information you've gotten, and that it was past performance an indication of future performance, or could it be different?
It was past performance, that having the same conversations over and over again and setting up the opportunity to be trained, and other staff members were taking from their time to make sure she had that information, and putting together, little cheat sheets so that she knew how to remember to do it. And this was just one example of many things, but that was a big one because it meant that I was late for meetings. So yeah.
So then why was it difficult? If
Because we needed a job. Because I don't want to be responsible for anybody not being able to pay their bills, or it felt bad and it went on longer than it should have. And again, that falls back on me. And it's why I'm a part of this EVC, because I want to become a more effective executive director. I want to become a more effective leader, not just in bringing the world to this cause of creating alternatives to incarceration for women and LGBTQ, but also in the community of work that we have, our community of staff. I want that same enthusiasm and belief, if you will. And so it felt bad, but that I generally, like, when I hire people, I'm too invested, I think, in their personal lives is probably the problem.
Yeah. So yeah, I faced a similar issue. I'd known the woman for 20 years. We've been long-term friends, but a decision based on the organization is different than a personal decision that is you having something against somebody or what have you. So my point is that not only have I done this and lived this myself, it becomes about you, right? Like, that's a Taylor problem, not an organizational problem. Or that was a Christopher problem for me when I was struggling with it. But the decision that was clear and was easy or hard, it was an easy decision. The receipts were clear. There wasn't much to litigate there about what should have been done. You didn't make the wrong decision. You just had to deal with the personal ramifications of making the right decision. Sometimes making the right decision is hard for us personally. Anyway,
you guys are teaming me up.
Thank you.
Unbelievably, you guys are teaming up unbelievably well. Could have put a quick pin on that, and then we'll circle back to that in some ways to help you. The big thing I want to try and delineate before we move on, this is team-based, right? So as a team, you may have a below-the-line behavior. The behavior is repeating mistakes more than 2 times, 3 times, whatever it is, right? All we're trying to outline is that no one can doubt what the culture and the expectations are for you as a team. When it comes to you individually as a leader, we'll get into that when we kind of do our individual MVP level. So I'm going to move just to give you guys the next slide to give you an example of what is probably one of the most fascinating and intelligent humans I've ever met, who is the cadet, what we call an ATF, Air Task Force Commander. So she is going through this exercise on her own. So just some examples. I didn't throw the leadership philosophy version to you guys. We'll get into that for the individual level. But day one, here is the team mission, vision, and principles. I, as a leader, in this case, Winkowski, is saying I'm going to connect with everyone or enable action through connectivity and reflection. Her core principles are fluency, so be able to have enough knowledge to speak it, a high level of responsibility and action. So day one, she's laid it out, who she is, what she stands for, and how she's going to lead. Her mission, the big goal this year, she wanted everyone to face a certain amount of fears, right? So turned it into a nice little acronym, face everything and rise, and then built her core principles on challenging folks to address their fears. So you guys can read through that. I believe you have a copy of everything. What I was truly fascinated is how she did it, right? Day one, everyone had to write what their biggest fear was. And then she reviewed them all and says, you're posturing, you're peacocking, you've got a deeper fear. Eventually they necked it down, and then everyone had to write a SMART goal for how they would counter the fear. That all went into this fear box that eventually, once a week, someone would have to stand up and give a brief on what their fear and how they challenged it. So it became a battle rhythm event to enforce her culture that she set up for the beginning of what their big picture mission was. And then fluency, how do I get you smart enough in the thing you're afraid of to be able to speak it and take action? Tenacity and reflection, you guys can kind of get the gist of it. So this is kind of that nesting approach of how I've got my individual leadership philosophy, how I want the mission at the end of this case semester. I want to take the team towards, and then how we're going to do it with those principles, and then what are the tangible goals that we're going to do to put us on a direction to be able to face everything and rise. So again, 22, don't get insulted by that. She's one of the smartest humans I've ever interacted with, and someone who just really buys into the culture setting. I'll pause on that, give you guys a little bit to read through it, and then fire away with any questions.
Could you make it larger?
I believe it's in the fit. There you go.
It's okay. I'm giving you problems. It's okay.
Sorry, that's on me. Sorry about that.
I have a question. Do we
Yeah, go
actually
ahead.
have all these PowerPoints? Do we have these forms?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thanks, Jen.
They did get sent out to you, so you should have them, but I will also send y'all the slides after. This is 200, so it doesn't look like it's going to get any bigger for you, Miss Taylor.
That's okay. I know we have them. I don't have my second screen set up, but I can look at it later.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions on kind of this example as we try and put some text to the stuff I've been spouting? Okay, if you want to advance one slide, I believe this is the second half. Just another example of the three categories of human and different roles you find yourself in, and behavior examples of what it looks like to respond above the line versus below. And I will tell you, when we started this off, it was not this clean. People had different, teammate is repeated 3 times, bystanders repeated 3 times. There was different above the line kind of actions and below the lines for all those. And in my opinion, it got way too complicated, but you can see the behaviors changed unique to the situation they're in. But big picture wise, pretty clear, we're going to take away, in order to be successful with this team, you can either choose to respond and be a teammate, you can choose to respond and be a bystander. And then each will be held accountable based on which one you decide to respond on when that event occurs. Questions on this matrix?
This is Donna again. I'm curious as how do you get your team to buy in to understand how to do this? I mean, we're here listening to you, hearing it firsthand on the importance of completing this form, doing this work. But how do we get our team to participate, to understand how to do this work?
Yeah, great question. So in this setting, this is the 4th semester I ran this exercise, and I can tell you the first time it was worth a piece of paper it was written on, which is nothing. It took the second iteration where now me as the overall leader was going around quizzing folks on what the items were on this team MVP, holding leaders accountable for not holding their subordinates accountable, right? So she's the lead cadet. I'm an active duty member. So I can go do it myself and reach down to the lowest level for the person who's struggling, but I had to hold her accountable. And so now as people have risen up in this system and dealt with it for about a year and a half, very minimal work was required to set this up. On active duty, we did this exact same drill, a bit older crowd, a bit of a crowd that was kind of used to the culture aspects. And for me, it took one person who broke it, very stern counseling on where they were missing it, and then them turning around and talking to the entire squadron, so 120 folks, and describing the below the line behavior they took, the lesson they learned from it, and how they're going to move forward. So if I were to boil this all down, it's time and iteration. And again, it comes back to, do they believe you believe it? Man, the boss is really about being a teammate. I know if I take this action, it's a bit more bystanderish. If he sees it, he's going to call me out. Why would I do that? Like, this is how the culture is going. So it's that constant CRO of how do I get this to be enforced? Does that help, Donna?
But I think I heard you say that it took almost a year and a half before it became really ingrained within that organization. It's not an immediate process.
It's not immediate, not at all. With ROTC, college kids, yes, it took longer. Active duty wise, it was a much faster burn just because you had an older crowd, more mature, and they were used to understanding cultural norms, right? I'm lucky. I'm in the Air Force. Everyone's got a high moral code. We've got a core set of core values. So the ability to fall in this, I want to be honest, I'd say it probably took about a month. And then when we went forward and deployed as a squadron, those are big moments, big team building bonds, if you will, a perpetual bridge folding exercise. When we executed on that deployment in this line, when we came back, there was never a question, right? Everyone fell in line very quickly. So I don't know the events that will help give you opportunities to demonstrate that you believe in this culture and that you're going to demand it. That's almost where I go back to the fear box. The reason I told that story is there's deliberate events designed to elicit the behavior that we want out of our team. You can go on every day. One of my objectives is going to be, I'm going to do a culture check today. Oh, boss is walking around doing a culture check. However you want to get there, there's many opportunities. My point is, I think senior leaders have to keep this the forefront of this mind and be super intentional. And priority, one is probably the mission you're doing. Priority two is that we're going to do our culture to make sure the mission gets done. So how do I reinforce that? And you're that intentional with it. The time it takes to get everyone to buy in is certainly going to vary based on the challenges your unique organization faces.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay. Can we go forward one more slide, please? All right. So this is where you guys were setting me up, Chris and Taylor, for the individual level. And so team MVP, think big, whatever your organization is. I say more than 2 humans, but what is the problem that you want to solve? What are the goals we have for it? And how are we going to go about it in the right way? And how are we going to check ourselves with making sure we have the right behaviors with the different hats we wear? If I shrink this all the way down, I asked this last time, but who was the hardest person to lead? You guys crushed it. All said yourself. The intent here now behind your individual MVP is to be that intentional as you were with your organization, with yourself. And so I don't have to go too far in depth on this. There's a few different bins, but overall the process is fairly similar. So big picture, like I kind of previewed before, is the life mission, right? What is it you want on your tombstone when you go smoking out of here? When everyone's standing around enjoying the beverages and food at your post-funeral get-together, what is it they're talking about you for? Again, we can let it happen, or we can be intentional in our aims as to driving the direction we did. A lot of people freak out when we talk life vision. Again, this is written on a computer, so the delete button still works. You can write it down on paper because the eraser works. I point to you is that life goals, life visions are not unchangeable or irremorphable, but we have to be able to set telescope goals because we'll never know if we're living day to day, week to week, quarter to quarter, month to month, year to year, if we haven't set out what those big picture life things are that we want to accomplish. And so of all the phases of this thing, from mission, vision, principles, those become the hardest to define when we're looking hard at ourselves in the mirror and going, why do I exist? What do I want to be here to do? I was put on this planet to achieve something. I've got a pretty wide open map. What do I think I want to do? And then having enough confidence to go ahead and regurgitate it to other folks. If it scares you, I would encourage you to still go ahead and do it, but also shrink it down to what is the 5-year, what is the 3-year, and I would say at a minimum, kind of your 1-year goals of things you want to accomplish. And then when I look at those goals, those visions, how do they line up with what my mission is for what I say I want to be on this planet to go do? And the process just shrinks down from there, right? I've got my quarterly goals on any topic that I think is deemable. And I look at myself and go, how is what I am doing this quarter feeding back into what I say I want to do this year, which is feeding back into what I want to say I want to do over my lifetime. So that is the big picture structure on there. I would offer the energy goals or the things I would suggest you don't move. How do we eat, sleep, move, and improve our mindset? Sorry, read is personal to me. Reading is very important and gives me energy, so I bumped it up there. But the eat, sleep, move, and mindset, I think are foundational goals that feed into who you are as a human and help you lead yourself to then build and go. If family's not your thing, cool, get rid of it. What are your things, and how does it strengthen your quarterly direction to meet your yearly goals? You can see all mine on there. Happy to take spears, arrows on any of those things, but I'll pause to talk any life mission, life vision questions.
I just would like to hear how you hold yourself accountable to something that you've created. Because a lot of these things require a lot of self accountability. And do you have any tips about that?
Yeah, two ways I try and do it. I always take my number 2 at the work organization I belong into, and I give them a copy of this and say, hey, here's what I'm trying to do this year. Let's do a quarterly check-in. They do the same thing. I mandate a individual MVP be done for everyone in our office. And our feedback, which we do, it's about every 6 months here, is derived off of these. This is totally individual, right? There's a work category on there, as we can imagine those work goals probably get a little bit bigger, and the second half of our feedback session will be there. But what I have found is that our individual MVP is congruent with who we are and what we're doing. The work stuff seems to take care of itself. So that's number 1. And number 2 is essentially a board of advisors. I realize I probably shouldn't have said board in this room. You guys are all going to have shivers. But who are those close friends of yours that know you well enough that either you can send this to ahead of time or saying, hey, I just want to have a conversation and kind of lay this out. I have been gifted with some great friends who are curious individuals. They can read this. We're close enough where they can call my shit out. We have pretty frank conversations on there. I'll be honest, I have not given it to my wife. Probably not ready for that level of accountability because she'll sharpshoot my goals. But a spouse obviously is another person. It's that person in your life who you think is curious enough, compassionate enough, stern enough to call you out on your means has been my approach.
Thank you.
Okay. So those are goals. I believe they're all accurate goals in terms of measurements and being able to hold myself accountable and clearly say yes or no, have I met them? Core principles. So I believe I told you guys all in the beginning, my mission statement, the relentless pursuit of effort, process, and ownership to be a leader for family, leaders, and friends. I chose to incorporate my core principles into my mission. I believe in them so strongly that everything I want to do, I want to put energy towards increasing my level of efforts, increasing my understanding and action and process, and then mistakes, or if I give my word, the ownership behind it. You don't have to do that. But for me, those core principles were so valuable that I put them in my mission statement. You'll also notice on this individual MVP, I don't have a separate leadership philosophy bin. We demonstrated that in the team one with Winkowski given hers. My leadership philosophy is the same as my mission statement. The reason I do that is because leadership is my mission. I do think I was put here. I do want to pursue a life of improving my own leadership and helping specifically family leaders and friends get better in their leadership. So it's the whole reason I'm here today. So I didn't have to change how I lead because it already aligns. It is my mission. You guys are probably different. I don't know a ton of folks who feel like they're put on this earth to be a better leader and want to help others be a better leader. I think a lot of people want to lead folks well because it serves in the accomplishment of their mission. That's great. That's fine. My question then is, from a leadership philosophy, Ben, how do you want to lead? And it takes the same level of reflection in what your mission is. So separate but similar. But something I would also challenge you guys to include in one of these bins as you think through not only what do I want to do, but how do I want to do it. Principle wise, this is an example of where I gave one word and then a descriptor of it. So that hopefully you could find this one day, or quite frankly right now, look at it and you would have a clear understanding of what Jerad means when he says effort, process, and ownership. So those are my descriptors for there. And to tie this back to Chris and Taylor's conversation, these are the areas, whether it's in goals or principles, where we can get more clear with ourselves and how we want to lead as an individual, right? I know the right decision for the company is to remove this individual who's not performing, but holy cow, it gives me a ton of guilt. Is that an area I want to focus in? Perhaps a core principle is compassionate. Yes, this person is not a good fit for my company, but if my principle is compassion, how do I set her up for success leaving this company? And it may be a work goal that if I have to fire someone, I'm going to give them at least 3 references. And I can't think of it off the top of my head, but something that gives her a chance. Ultimately, it's up to her, but something that gives her a chance when she moves on to be successful, right? We're intentionally looking at the mirror and going, man, what is the dark side of who I am and how I act? How do I want to counter that? If I'm naturally lazy, is effort something I want to do? Right? And maybe I should back up a bit. These core principles can be aspirational. I understand we're not perfect and we all want to drive in different areas. If I really struggle in discipline, like I want to put it on here and have it front and center so much that discipline becomes an ethos of who I am. So that's how I'm trying to tie in who you are as an individual person, individual leader, and how that has to fit with your team dynamic. I'll pause there if that sparks any further conversation or questions. Nothing. All makes sense to you guys perfectly from the team dynamic and how we integrate ourselves and our leadership and our own personal missions. Okay. Moving on to the kind of last 2 bins here. Definition of success. This is the one area where I will do 0 kind of coaching, questioning, whatever. The point here is that when you lay down at the end of the night, when you do your quarterly review or whatever review you feel is appropriate for you, you have set what is your own personal definition of success. When I got to Marquette University, it was a very different landscape than an active duty military unit. And man, there were a lot of weird things going on, and I kind of sat back for a good 4 months and just watched. Eventually, I just couldn't take it. I thought the university was missing good opportunities. I thought it was impacting the student experience. And so can I reset my definition of success for what I wanted to do? For me, it was said what needed to be said. They may not listen to me, that's fine. But would my words add value to the conversation? If so, then I need to say what needed to be said. So it became the way I looked back on myself when I did my review. It wasn't every day, but I would look back at bigger moments and said, hey man, did I meet this definition of success? One word focus, again, trying to shrink down for that quarter. But what is the one word that you want to put front and center in your mind? I write it down on my desk and have it displayed of how do I want to be this quarter? For me, coming in after 20 years in the military and teaching a bunch of college kids, I was way overcomplicating stuff. Lessons were too much. I just thought I had all this valuable information to share, and they would absorb about 10% of it. So can I simplify this so that they have one tangible nugget per class, maybe per week, that they're walking away with, that I did a good enough job articulating to them of what it is. So simplifying became my my focus for that specific quarter. So then I would challenge you, what is it you think you're struggling with? What is it you want to do better? And what is it you want to focus on? What is that word? And how do I focus in on it? And how does that become a driving factor as I look at through my different goals and visions that I have for that quarter or that time period? Okay, pause there. Either I've blown you all away or you all think I'm full of shit. So let's hear the questions.
I have to admit, I thought you were full of shit. No, I'm joking. I was skeptical in the beginning. But a lot of the things you're saying actually fit with what I do. I really like you talk about having a board of advisors. And of course, I'm thinking we are nonprofits. Of course, you have a board. And then when you explain that is something my therapist had me set up to and do because
Awesome.
of a history of trauma and making bad decisions in my personal life. And I'm engaged now, but like, boy, did my board have to go through and, is this right? Is this, and it was really nice to know that my therapist had directed me in that way because it's really helped me. It's helped me stay honest with myself, stay honest with the work I'm doing and just show up better in life. And so it's a really good idea. So I really liked hearing you say that.
Good, thank you. I'm super introverted. I have moved from everything I've known to Wisconsin, and I know I will lose friends, and that's why I had to be intentional with goal setting to have my phone call goal. I've got a giant list on my board, and at a minimum, I make sure I get 2 friends of those per month. Because for me, the antidote to being isolated or alone is to call those folks. And after the conversation, I'm thankful every time. But the intent was just to be deliberate. So your personal board of advisors, there may be a goal you set within there for a check-in on whatever frequency you think is appropriate. So I'm just trying to tie those 2 entities together, but thank you for speaking up on that. One more question, please.
I had a question about doing this before specifically your own team. This seems very applicable if it's something that it looks multidimensional, like you could use it and set the tone where it becomes like an organizational culture. But if you're looking to specifically make it a team culture, where you're setting the values for your own team, where I guess bringing it down to like on a smaller team level, do you feel like it needs to mirror the greater vision for the organization if you feel like that is not necessarily as well fleshed out and defined?
Yeah, great question. If you notice in the previous team MVP example, she laid out her individual leadership philosophy. She then chose to make the decision. Sorry, I just gotta double check my slide deck here. There we go. So her individual leadership philosophy, she's laying it out who she is. Her principles are fluency, responsibility, and action. When it came to the team, this is what all 70 of you cadets are going to buy in towards. She kept fluency, but then switched to tenacity and reflection. Right? Fluency was very important to her because she felt overwhelmed when things got complicated. She mentally thought she understood it, but she could never speak it back. But she's like, I think I'm not the only one here. I want to incorporate this. Then the rest of her principles for that team, in order to get after her mission of face everything and rise, put her back in the tenacity and reflection realm. So she, through conversations with mid-level leaders and different folks, they kind of said, hey, responsibility and action are good. That's you. What do you think about this, this, and this? And they kind of hashed out together what they are. So everyone knows who she stands for, but collectively as a team, they decided to hone in on those. So my point to you is, yes, they can be different. who you are as a leader and how you want to carry yourself can vary for how the team and the culture overall is going to carry themselves. Do I think it's a big deal? Not at all, right? Tenacity and reflection seem like pretty good goals. I'm sorry, pretty good principles to have everyone driving after. That's how things kind of shook out in those cases. I think it would have also been okay if she said everyone's going to mirror me. These are the 3 principles I believe in, and this is what I'm going to ask everyone to do. But this through conversating and different dialogue is kind of what they came up with together with her senior leaders, if you will. Does that help answer your question?
Yes. And it's a good time of year for it, right? At the beginning of the year to set a good intention. I did
Would
crack up
agree.
laughing when you said you hadn't shared it with your wife yet. As a wife, that made me literally laugh out loud.
Yeah, she's not quite into the goal setting and mission vision stuff, but we'll say the biggest thing we have at home is a family motto. So humble, fearless, kind, and then we have a bunch of the boards and stuff get moved on. I can't think of their name right now, but essentially took those, had the kids write them all down and paint on there, and they're plastered, above each kid's doorway. So similar intent, right? Of how do we reinforce, in this case, our family motto? But that's as far as I've been able to get in that situation. Okay. Any other questions on the individual MVP? Okay. The questions that were asked earlier in terms of revisiting it, you change as a person, I would kind of give you the same guidance on there. I do review this quarterly. I do have, I don't know if you can see them on my camera, but off in the background are my wood boards that I ordered that have effort, process, and ownership on there. I was scared shitless after I came up with this. Don't think I fully believed in it. Then after a while, I became so comfortable with myself that if you didn't like my principles or didn't want to associate with me, that's okay. And to me, that was when I think I hit a different turning point in being comfortable in my own skin for who I am as a leader. And so that's why I give the birthday example. If I was going to be all your birthday, you're going to reel it off. I think when you can get to the same point for your mission and principles, then you are truly believing on those things and you can regurgitate them without fear. And quite frankly, welcome the conversation. The best case scenario is how did you get there? Then you kind of get to walk them through your journey. But remember, all this serves as a guidepost. Your life mission can change. I get a lot of questions. What if my life mission is just to raise the best family possible? That's okay too. It doesn't have to be work associated or your own individual achievements. What is the reign that you think is so important to you that you want remembered for you? And then are we deviating from that? That's why those quarterly reviews, that personal board of advisors are important to help you get there. Some people are also afraid of goal setting because if they write it down, then they hold themselves accountable. And that's where I default you back to what is your definition of success? You put a big, steamy, tough goal up there. What's the progress we made this quarter? And maybe we have to adjust it. But did I meet my personal definition of success? So this isn't here to taunt you and everyone paste their individual MVP up on their mirror in their bathroom, because I know everyone loves it so much. But it's just meant there to be that guidepost to push you so that we're doing it intentionally, right? Is this the direction I want to go? Is this the port I want to sail to? I think big picture wise, that's all I have, guys. So I'm happy to continue and answer more questions on there and how this fits within your leadership style at work or your ability as a spouse or parent, because I think it is multifaceted in that regard. But as I said in the beginning, you guys have to want it and find value out of it and kind of put your own effort into how fresh and how often you use it.
So maybe I missed this earlier, but going back to the team MVP things, I think what I'm understanding is like you're coming up with the mission yourself, or are you trying to come up with this whole thing with your team?
Yeah, definitely a choice in how you handle that.
Okay.
It's kind of per organization, per leadership style. You might be extremely type A. I am so crystal clear on where we're going. Like team, this is the mission. It might be more of a different leadership style where you super value that collaboration and the team's a bit disjointed, so you need folks brought in. I was a bit sneaky. I knew exactly where I wanted to go. But if I came out in that work environment and told everyone, there'd probably be resistance. But if we did it together and I kind of boxed them this direction, boxed them that direction, suddenly they've come up with this mission that's in line with what we're doing. Variety of different ways to approach it. Some of that is knowing yourself and how comfortable you are. Some of that's knowing your team and where you guys are at, both culturally and alignment wise, and choosing kind of that best course of action to get there.
Okay, thanks.
Anyone else? We got about 10 minutes left. Otherwise, I can cut you back to your exciting day jobs.
Yeah, I just for reactions so that, you know, for the interactive component of this. So for me, this makes a lot of sense. I don't have many questions other than, you know, just interpreting most of this and thinking about how to apply it in our individual organizations. Maybe, of course, different than organizational culture bit where it's coming from a captive audience with a couple 100-year history, right, versus new organizations that are right. So there's just a difference there to apply, but I think that's just inherent in any material that's presented. But I do recognize that startup culture or under 5 years in existence, there's a learning curve on many of the things here. But the personal MVP stuff, that's just us being high performers, and I receive it to figure out how to build this and make it apply for us. So very spot on, very, very helpful conversation, and don't take my lack of questions for lack of you know, receiving this. It's more so I think you're in my case preaching to the choir.
I appreciate that. You brought up some good points. Organizational culture, if it's well established, I'm not saying day one you take this thing and go, I just got done with this meeting, we have to do this. But there's almost a fun test to do should you do a version of that. Hey, do you think we could take our 20-year-old company organizational culture and line it up with here? And someone may push back and go, hey, we've already got it. Sweet, then this should take about 5 minutes to fill out. And I predict it won't. And there might be some interesting conversations that unfold as you try and take that 20-year-old organizational culture and distill it down into something that may be beneficial or maybe a waste of your time. But the difference of it's always been that way and taking it down may be something. The other way I would offer, you know, not necessarily a startup, but if you get into a newer position or maybe you start a new section, it doesn't have to just be a team MVP for the entirety of the organization, right? So in a military construct, heavy on chain of command, big bosses, medium, little bosses on down. I have 4 more team MVP sheets that I could show you from the different mid-level leaders who took their own team and said, this is what our culture is going to be. Now it's aligned with that bigger overarching team MVP, but as younger leaders with a little bit less responsibility, smaller amount of personnel to be in charge of, they were getting repetitions at building that and developing their own culture. So in theory, as they step up and gain more responsibility and have to have a bigger culture reign that's touching them, they at least had some reps and experience with doing that. And then the one other thing you made me think of was the individual MVP, as I mentioned, is a great feedback mechanism to walk through with someone. People love to complain that they've never been invested in. No one's trying to develop them. They don't get any professional development training. I have received very good feedback on doing a walkthrough of that individual MVP with coworkers and subordinates. You know, step one is to lead ourselves and make sure we understand it, but then turning around and helping someone else walk through that same process. Not only does it show you care on them, in theory, you're actually caring in them because they're buying in and trying these things. Again, if they stick with it, it's up to them. We're in charge of our own destiny, but I think you're doing your part as a leader to help give them their same clarity.
What comes to mind for me is one, a founder that I work with, but then also my own work on this concept of, you didn't mention this, so I'm not putting this on you, but cheetahs and puppies, right? So it's very, very parallel to the idea of the bell curve you mentioned earlier with the 10-80-10. So comparing this to the culture that you're coming from is that it's the downline hierarchical, people do what they're told, versus the organizations that, right, give or take, right? Because it's humanity we're dealing with, but they are tied to execution, and they are going to be, they're going to handle the directive, versus our landscape, which is much more inspiration based. The magnetic effect of the founder draws I want to be here because I am mission aligned, that you referred to earlier. When mission and competence are disconnected, we've got a Taylor situation. I want to be here, I just don't know how to get it done. And then you have a Taylor or Christopher energy, is like, I want to help you, help us all get there. So the definition of my leadership is to have followers. Sometimes those followers are not going to be the perfection of humanity, right? So it becomes a pretty serious conundrum to have a culture of inspiration and impact with some of the tools that you've offered, and then dealing with the reality of cheetahs and puppies. Right. Some people are going to run way ahead. Some people are going to be like, I love this, but this pace just doesn't really match my current skill set. And I think embedded in what you're describing is like, how do we develop people so that we can distinguish where they fall in the bell curve? And that may be a different session altogether. But it is a chink in the armor, so to speak, on what we have in this. I want to do the thing, and I don't want to be subversive, but I'm going to get something done and put it forth to check it off my list. But it's not going to be aligned with the culture of high performance and extreme discipline. It's somewhere beneath that. And then we kind of either make hard decisions, or we, like it's a let them go or lead them up a different hill. It's tough. There's no perfect answer, I don't think.
Yeah, I agree. The nuance you're describing with individuals is tough. You're right. It's a separate convo. I guess I'm trying to get everyone to reflect on, are we an organization that takes puppies to cheetahs? Are we a cheetah only hire? Are we a puppy only hire because we want to develop? Whatever the slice we go in there, back to the point of, there will be individual situations that challenge whether I act of principle over preference. Is it so common that that's how we want it to be, or we kind of make an exception here? But I think big picture wise, not every gust of wind is going to be favorable, but on the whole, are we sailing towards the right direction? So I appreciate you pointing out the difficulties of nuance and tactical application. But ideally, we've set a big enough picture that we're capturing the preponderance of the wind. And if we want to take puppies to cheetahs, that then sets the flavor for how we want to do that, or not. And then those puppies got to go somewhere else. I don't know where they go to not get eaten by cheetahs.